Hey everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Common Ground. I'm Deb Ryan, and as usual, I'm joined by my co-host Teresa. How are
Hi,
you?
everybody.
It's good to see you. So before we kick off, make sure you like and subscribe the podcast. But there's been some stuff going on this week. It's Climate Week in
And
New
some
York,
stuff.
and the UN General Assembly is also in New York, and President Trump gave a crazy speech earlier this week. And so we just thought that we would talk about it because he did address energy and a whole bunch of stuff. So, Teresa, I just wanted to throw to you, like, as someone who's sitting in Europe, maybe doesn't hear Trump speak all that often and stuff like that because you're a little bit shattered from it. Like, what was your takeaway from it?
Um, yeah, it's a bit shocking, right? Like, it's like, I don't even know what to say anymore. I don't even know what to say anymore. So before he spoke, I was like trawling the internet and trying to figure out what he was going to speak about. And like his own advisors were saying that, climate is kind of trivial in the big scheme of things, and he's going to talk about investment and trade and the economy. And I was like, oh, that's great. Climate's kind of trivial. Like, I mean, it's not great, but like it's great in the context of he's not going to speak about it, because if he was going to speak about it in front of the General Assembly, it obviously wasn't going to be good. So I figured if he thought it was too small a topic to address, that would be good for us. He changed his mind. Clearly, he did speak about it. So
Yep.
he changed his mind again, like on everything else in the world. Changed
And
his
when you
mind.
say,
Spoke about it.
just to ask, so when you say like some of his advisors, because Chris Wright did sort of talk about, he thought that climate wasn't the existential crisis that it was. Is that kind of what you're talking about and stuff, where they're like, it's like, we don't need to worry about this climate change stuff. We're going to focus on everything else. Like, is that kind of what you mean by some of that kind
Mm.
of stuff?
So there was an ongoing debate in the very geeky climate circles over. So the US can leave the Paris Agreement, right, which is just the framework that agrees goals on climate, or the US could actually withdraw from the UNFCCC, which is the UN body, the organization that the US are a member of, that hosts the Paris Agreement. So there was this very nerdy discussion over whether Trump would use his UNGA speech to formally announce that the US might exit the UNFCCC.
That makes
And
sense.
everybody was like, yeah, like that would be bad, right? Because like you can re-enter an agreement. So like he withdrew from the Paris Agreement the first time. Biden rejoined. Trump can re-withdraw. So like entering and exiting, yeah, no, it's crazy. Entering and exiting agreements is a lot easier than entering and exiting the organization itself. So that was
Okay.
kind of like the backdrop to that. And then like a former staffer just said, "Why would he announce that? That's so trivial." And I was like, "Great, great.
Okay.
If this is too
That's good
trivial,
context. Yep.
yeah." I was like, he's going to talk about other stuff. But he did talk about climate, calling it a con.
Yep. So there was a couple of pieces, and I was going through the transcript, which is very long, very rambling, and very hard to read. But
He spoke for an
um,
hour, right?
yeah, he spoke for an
He
hour.
had 15 minutes. Can you imagine? He spoke like, what a white male thing to do. It's like, I'm just going to take 4 times the
I'm
amount
going
of
to take 4 times as long. I'm going to complain about
4 times
escalators
as long to tell you that you
and
suck.
yeah, pretty much.
I mean,
So
mostly he said the UN isn't doing its job, right? That's what he said.
yeah, and you all and all of you here all suck. So the first piece that he was talking about immigration, but he started to talk. My dogs have some very strong opinions about this, if people can hear them in the background.
I
But
know, I can hear them growling. It's very cute.
they're fighting over a toy under my feet. But the first time he started to mention energy was when he was rambling about immigration. And I have a whole, as an immigrant in America, I have a whole different slew of views, but we're going to leave those for another time because we're going to talk about energy. But he said both the immigration and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Western Europe. If something is not done immediately, this cannot be sustained. I don't know if he was meaning immigration or energy or both or who knows, but that was the first time he brought up energy in this
But he
long
said
rambling.
suicidal? Suicidal energy ideas?
Suicidal. Both the immigration
Right?
and their suicidal energy ideas will be the death of Europe.
Yeah.
Like, like
It's so funny.
the thing that really like is confronting about that, like we here in the US, and I follow politics and policy and things like that. I listen to Trump's speech more than I would like to admit. It's not good for my mental health. But like I'm kind of used to this rambly, like he says silly things. Everyone like, and this is partly why he gets away with it, because everyone's like, "Oh, it's just Trump." But like to say it at the UN on a world stage is pretty devastating. The thing, and I'd love your kind of view on it, given you're sitting in Western Europe, and you're also from Western Europe, like, I feel like there are people out there, whether it's in the US or in Europe or anywhere else in the world, who are gonna listen to that and go, "Yeah, I agree with that," because I don't like that whatever, right? Like, whether it's energy prices or whatever, people find a reason to not like it. So I'm just kinda curious, like, how do you like you said, it's a very confronting statement. Like, how do you feel about that kind of stuff? How do you interpret it?
Hmm. I mean, probably also not very representative of the average citizen who doesn't work in climate. But I mean, I think that like most of what he says, all of what he says is incredibly confronting, right? What he says about immigrants, what he said about autism, what he said about energy and climate, like all of it is incredibly confronting. And most of it, probably all of it is factually incorrect, right? Like Tylenol does not cause autism and climate is not a hoax, right? And like we know that he's wrong. There's data out there to prove that he's wrong. Every institution out there says he's wrong. And like every scientist pretty much this week has taken to LinkedIn and other platforms to talk about how he's wrong. I think what scares me, like what really, really scares me is that his followers, his voters, his camp in the US, but also people who admire him in Europe, they're not going to be swayed by more data, right? Because like
Yeah.
this appeals on a narrative level. This appeals on a level of like, white men have been disenfranchised and they don't have jobs, and we need to help out family who are suffering from like socioeconomic disadvantages, right? So like people who are really suffering from inequality and job loss and have been unemployed for a long time. Like this appeals, right? As in like we have someone to blame, right? Like we can blame
Those
immigrants or we
people
can
over there,
blame
and yeah.
whatever it is. Like sometimes it's autistic people, sometimes it's immigrants, sometimes it's like Democrats, whoever he comes up with. And I think what scares me is just that, like all of us taking to our online platforms and throwing more data at the problem isn't going to sway public opinion, right? And like what sways public, there are real issues in the world and people really are suffering with like the economic situation, they're suffering with the geopolitical situation. um, and I think unless we address the root causes of people being upset, we're just driving more voters into the right camp. And like that could be Nigel Farage in the UK, and that could be Trump in the US, and that could be, like in Germany we have our own
Yeah.
own right wing party, right? And like I think that's what really scares me is that it's not actually about climate. It's not actually about like any of the topics that he mentions. It's that people will blindly follow this because it offers an alternative to the narrative that they live in.
Yeah. And it is very, to your point, it's very confronting, and I think this is partly why you and I are trying to do what we're doing, right? Like, coming from an energy background, like, I think we should still be funding fossil fuels and doing things like that, but, like, not at the discretion of anything else, not in lieu of anything else. And it to your point, like, just putting more data out there and stuff, we sort of end up in our own little echo chambers and ecosystems where we don't break out of that. And more data, like, there's been a lot of, discussion around whether it's energy data, and climate data, whether it is particularly health data, stuff like that. Like, people don't believe data anymore. People can take whatever data they want, manipulate it, and tell their own story. And it's, to your point, it's about the narrative. I think that was something really key that you said. And
Right. So I've been wondering about that. It's kind of been on my mind, right? Because like I posted pretty much right away, like a couple of hours after Trump spoke. And my like the post didn't have a huge amount of engagement, but nobody pushed back, right? Isn't like overall my followers are pretty much in agreement that that was a crazy thing to say. So I'd love to hear what your feed looks like. Like, do people agree with this?
So it is really challenging, right? Because this whole idea of this echo chamber of like who is listening, who's paying attention, and who, like, even when you and I record something like this, right? Like, who is there anyone that is going to learn something new or be interested and things like that? And I think, given my background in oil and gas, yeah, like a lot of my followers on LinkedIn and Substack and even personally and things like that, like, I know a lot of people that did vote for Trump multiple
Yeah.
times, to
Do you
be
think they're
honest.
voting for him? Sorry, like that
Yeah.
feels like a huge rift in like your personal and professional community, but like, do you think they're voting for him on an immigration platform, or are they voting for him like actually on an energy and climate platform?
So, I mean, given my background as a petroleum engineer, I think, the oil and gas industry is actually quite a global industry. That's why, as an Australian, I'm sitting here in the US because I moved here for an oil and gas job a long
Mhm.
time ago.
Mhm.
And we are a pretty global industry. I'm not going to say that that doesn't mean that there are people that have very strong immigration views in that industry. I think we're very quick to be like black and white on these things, right? But given a lot of my network is very pro energy, a lot of it
Yeah.
is around energy and climate.
Yeah.
Again, when the
Yeah.
DOE put their climate report out, again, a lot of commentary and stuff, particularly on my Substack, was very pro that report. Like, look, the government's done a good job, like putting out real science versus, and
Even
that's
though the
now
science
being,
was wrong. And,
yeah,
like,
and
everybody
now
said the
obviously,
science was wrong, and everybody ignored the facts, and, like, yeah.
yep.
No, but I
So,
find this fascinating, right?
yeah,
Because, like, so I posted, and I didn't get any pushback on my post, and then I saw somebody, like, I log on the next day, and, like, somebody else had posted that was pretty much the same thing. He was just saying, like, clearly it's not a hoax. And the comment section on his post was so vile, I screenshotted it because people were attacking him personally. They were calling him out as stupid. They were attacking the science. They were like, it was just like, it was wild, right? So, like, I go to check out this person that he, like, works for the UK government. He has, like, 1,000 followers on LinkedIn. And, like, this thing just, like, went viral, but, like, not in a good way, right? In a very
yeah,
uncomfortable way. And I was like, this must be awful to read when you log in the morning, but also, it's really worth doing because 'cause you're actually creating debate, right? Like, you're
yeah,
actually, like, bottoming out, like, the different viewpoints that we have. Whereas, like, when I post, like, I'm fully in the echo chamber, right? Like, I don't think there's a single person who follows me who doesn't agree with me.
yeah.
So, like,
Maybe me
all the
sometimes,
more
but
work
like it's not just me.
you.
I'm like, just me. And I don't disagree
It's
with you a
beautiful.
lot, to be honest.
My podcast co-host doesn't agree with me, but this is beautiful. Like, I love this.
Why we're doing this. Like, and it's not that we actually agree on a lot of things, obviously. And but that was why, to be honest, it's why I pulled out that quote that was early on in Trump's speech that doesn't get a lot of attention and stuff, because I think there's a lot of people, and I said this earlier, there's a lot of people that would have heard that quote from the president and been like, yeah, we do think that Europe's energy policies are suicidal, right? Like, it's a kind of an extreme, crazy word to use. But yeah, there are people in my network who would agree with that, like,
Mm,
genuinely. So
mm.
it's really interesting. It is part of this interesting debate about, like, how do we find the right balance in terms of energy policy, and
Yeah.
balancing energy and climate. Because I feel like it's
Yeah, and,
one or
like,
the other.
is it suicidal or is it forward looking, right? Because 'Cause I would obviously say that continuing to exploit fossil fuels is suicidal because it's getting hotter and hotter and weather is getting more and more extreme,
Yep.
and, like, to me, that genuinely is suicidal, right? Like, on behalf of the human race. But yeah, I mean, like, the whole, like, is energy policy in Europe going the right way? I mean, like, he called out Germany, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So let me read some of that
yeah.
quote because I've got it here. We've been having some internet gremlin issues and my dogs are very unsettled, but I do have the quote up. So when he actually genuinely started talking about energy, he said, "Energy is another area where the United States is now thriving like never before." Just to fact check this, our highest production was actually previously under Biden, but fact. Well, let's not let facts get in the way of a good story. Um,
Nice.
um, we're getting rid of the falsely named renewables. By the way, they're a joke. They don't work. They're too expensive. They're not strong enough to fire up the plants that you need to make your country great. So he's saying your. He's talking to the assembly and calling them all out and telling them how crap they are. Um,
Mhm.
he goes on a wind rant, which we know he doesn't like the look of wind because he complains about it when he's at his golf courses. Um, skip that. Most expensive energy ever conceived, and it's actually energy. You're supposed to make money with energy, not lose money. You lose money that governments have to subsidize. You can't put them out without massive subsidies, which, again, I don't necessarily think I agree with that because, again, putting money into stuff to drive development is how we get to economies of scale. It doesn't matter if it's oil and gas, it doesn't matter if it's solar, it doesn't matter if it's pharmaceuticals, it doesn't matter what it is. Anyway, so skipping ahead, he rants about China and the fact that they're building everything, but then they don't use it. And then he said Europe, on the other hand, has a long way to go with many countries on the brink of destruction because of the green energy agenda. And I give a lot of credit to Germany. Germany was being led down a very sick path, both on immigration, by the way, and on energy. They were going green and they were going bankrupt. And the new leadership came in and they went back to where they were with fossil fuel and with nuclear, which is good. It's now safe and you can do it properly. But they went back to where they were. I'm going to stop there. It's very hard to read Trump's transcripts and stuff. But like he talks about all green being bankrupt, and that it's not politically correct and that we shouldn't be doing any of it and stuff like that. You're from Germany. You spend a lot of time there. Like, just go. Like, what is? It's a
Oh.
crazy kind of statement.
Um, I am in Germany right now. This is Germany. Um, that that light behind me is being powered by renewable electricity, and it works. Um, I don't know. Like, I don't really know what to say, right? So Germany has had this like very unusual energy journey where we phased in renewable energy subsidies very early, right? So feed-in tariffs on the grid, and had a huge success story with it, right? As in like prices for like the installation of like renewable generation capacity used to be very high. We had these feed-in tariffs. Pretty much if like you look around my village, like every other roof has rooftop solar on it. That is because of the subsidies, right? So like nowadays, I'm not saying that they're all energy independent, but like there are many, many like individual homes and many, many like collections of homes, right? So either entire villages or cooperatives that invested into their energy security really early on, right? As in, like, they have passive houses, they generate their own hot water, they generate their own electricity. And if you look at the grid, and like now, like these subsidies are starting to be phased out, right? Because like the cost of solar has come down massively. Um, So I actually think that Germany is a renewable energy success story, right? Like in as far as that exists anywhere. Like we have something like 60% of capacity on the grid is renewable already. So yeah, I think like as far as Germany is concerned, like or as far as renewable energy is concerned, I think Germany is actually a success story. And as much as you can be a success story, there's something like 60% of electricity on the grid today is generated from renewable energy, right? So it's a fairly large share in the like global average of like what you
Yeah.
see. So like if anything, I think that we're doing pretty well on the renewable energy story, and we have not committed suicide, and we still have, we still have manufacturing capacity. Like we still have steel, we still have automotive, obviously. And I'm like, we're still like an industrial powerhouse, despite the fact that we've largely moved to renewable
Yeah.
electricity. But I guess where I was trying to land with this is that like so what Trump is commending us for is that we now have a conservative government, and our minister of economy has a gas background. So
Mm.
she's come out and said that she wants to increase gas capacity and is looking at gas-fired power plants, which is neither here nor there for me, right? As in, like we're phasing out coal, or like for the most part, and moving away from coal. Not everywhere, but like for the most part, at least the lignite side of it. And we've gotten rid of like we've had a nuclear moratorium forever, right? Like we put that in place under Merkel, which was like when did Fukushima happen? Like
Yeah.
2011, I
11,
think? Like
12. Yeah.
a
Yeah.
long, long time ago. Um, so like moving away from fossils, and we moved away from nuclear a long time ago. And this idea that like we now have a conservative government who are leaning more towards, I'm going to say more traditional like energy sources, like that's actually something that in our case it changes course, right? As in, like, it was very clear that we were rowing in this direction, and now we're trying to change course back to something that we maybe previously had. And, like, I don't think that creates a huge amount of planning security. So, I'm like,
Mm.
if anything, I find this very confusing, and not very forward looking either, right? Because, like, we already have succeeded to such a large extent on the renewable energy electricity
Yeah.
generation.
Well, and the other issue, and there's been so much written about this, and we don't need to get into this, and we also talked about it on an earlier episode as well. But like gas supply into Europe isn't just because you've got a background in gas doesn't mean that you can just magically find gas. Gas supply into Europe's been challenging. The US is very excited to provide that gas via LNG, but that doesn't mean that it's just going to magically turn up. So, and that it's
And, like,
gonna be
traditionally,
cost
it's come
effective.
from Russia, right?
Yeah,
Like, I'm not sure that anybody in this day and age wants to actually increase dependency on Russia.
yeah. So it's again, like, energy and climate are so intertwined, and I think for me, sitting in this kind of like a foot in both camps of like, I do think that we can figure out which fossil fuels should be funded and developed as part of an overall energy mix. But renewables, I have solar panels on my house as well. It's great. My electricity bill is like $20 a month all year round because I live in Colorado where it's really sunny. It's great. Like,
Oh,
even at
no,
home.
you're gonna lose your job.
But it's, so from an affordability point of view, right? Like that, it doesn't make any sense. When again, for a consumer, like it's great. I've locked in the price of my personal power because I have solar panels on my roof. Um,
Mm,
so it again, trying to think about like, well, we're going to just do one or the other is crazy. I think in certain places, different types of energy make sense. We've talked about this before, but like I have a house in Hawaii as well, and natural gas is not the answer in Hawaii because it's an island. So like
it's an
if
island.
Hawaii is geothermal and solar and hydro,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah,
at
well,
least
we
it
have
should be.
geothermal in the garden. Like, it's
Yeah.
been there since, like, 1979 or something ridiculous
Yeah.
like that. Like,
I mean, Hawaii's main power source actually comes from burning diesel because you can ship diesel easily, and that's made Hawaiian electricity the most expensive in the country. So it's like if we can move to some of these
yeah, and,
other
like, is
forms
that
of
an efficient
energy.
use of fuel, right? Where I'm like,
Exactly.
like, really, like, you're burning diesel to generate electricity? Like, they
Yep.
cannot be the answer.
Exactly. And so like more and more like energy and climate, like we shouldn't be making energy. I don't think we should be making energy decisions because of climate. And I don't necessarily think we should be making climate decisions because of energy, but like let's optimize the best use of all of these things in the right places. And some of that will drive efficiency. And if we can drive efficiency, we will actually do both to a certain extent. Like,
So what do
um,
you think about, like, subsidizing the hell out of renewables? Because that's making an energy decision based on climate.
Well, but, fossil fuels get subsidized in the US as well. So,
And
like,
they
it
okay. Oil.
so it's not, and that's again, like I sort of alluded to this earlier, as things are being developed, whether it was developing, fossil fuels at scale with hydraulic fracturing here in the US, or if it was deploying solar, or if it's
And I mean,
developing new
hydraulic fracturing has a whole set of, like, other issues, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I
we're
know, I know. But, like, and, or whether it was developing, vaccines, right, for COVID. These things, to get things up and running, to get things started, often take government money. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they will need that government money going forward. And solar is kind of at that point where solar panels out of China are so cheap that it has become more affordable for communities. And again, my community in Hawaii is the same, where it's
Mhm,
cheaper for us to put solar on our house than it is to connect to the grid. So we are going to do
mhm,
solar because it's the most
mhm.
economic option for my house.
So you're doing micro, you're, like, not grid connected, micro supplying your own house.
Batteries
Okay.
at our
So
own
you
house.
can't
And so,
even feed in because, I mean, like, that's the whole, like, economic logic here, right? Is, like,
Mhm.
that, like, what we're not using, we're feeding into the grid, and
Yep,
that's how we're getting paid pretty much.
yep. But we will not, if for Hawaii, we will be our own little system. We will feed our own batteries and we will then take from our batteries.
Okay, so
So
you have your
again,
own storage system, so, like, at night, you, like, power your house with your battery
right.
system.
And so because of the early incentives around solar development, we, we were able to drive down, as a country, we were able to drive down the cost of that. And China's been able to drive down the cost of panels. This was
Yeah.
partly why Biden still had tariffs on Chinese solar panels because it was disadvantaging the
Should we
US solar.
though? I mean, really,
I don't
like,
know.
if you're gonna get the
Yeah.
right thing, like, you're not
Yeah.
getting it from the right place, but you're getting the right technology into the like, I don't know
Yeah.
about the
There's a
tariffs.
whole piece there
I
though,
mean,
right? But
Germany is
like,
huge in this, right? Because of, like, the
yeah.
IP issues, like, there's been a lot of IP theft. Um, so Germany is very upset about, like, anything coming out of China, but, I mean, you're getting the
Yeah.
right thing at a lower cost, like, is that a terrible thing for consumers?
No, it's not. Which is why the tariff, and we've talked about this before, this is why the tariffs in the US are fucking outrageous. So it's crazy.
Yeah, I
But I
mean, that's a
think,
whole other
like, yeah, like I think more and more we can't, energy is such an important conversation, but so is climate. And I think more and more trying to separate those is impossible.
It
because
is impossible, yeah, and, like, we all need energy, right? Like, I want an abundant supply of cheap energy because, like, you know what? Like, I also wanna power my laptop and, like, I wanna have the lights on at night and wanna be warm in the winter, and, like, all of these things are true, right? Like, whether we come from the climate camp or the energy camp, like,
yep,
all of those things are true. It's just we get to choose our sources, and if you set government incentives right, then, in an ideal case scenario, the sustainable choice also becomes affordable, which it
yep.
isn't everywhere always
It's
at
not
all
everywhere.
times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, and that's why I think, like, in certain parts of the world, like, coal and gas are still the answer for grids, right? Like, and so, but is there a way to figure out what the lowest emission production of those things is and incentivize those companies that are producing oil and natural gas and maybe even coal with the lowest footprint, right? And like, so then
Yeah.
how do we incentivize that so that we can move everybody and continue to keep reducing emissions where we can, but then being very efficient in where we deploy different types of energy production, whether it is geothermal or
Yeah.
wind or,
Yeah, and,
whatever
like,
it
what are
is.
we financing, right? Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
always look at this, like, when you look at development banks that are still financing fossil fuel, like, even if it's inefficient, even if it doesn't make any sense, they're still financing it in, like, emerging economies that need help with their energy supply, and, like, the whole reason that you would have a development bank step in is because we believe it's a right. There's a right to develop, right? And like to develop an economy or an industry, like you actually need access to energy, right? And like
Mhm.
generally, there's like this underlying belief is the same reason that you would subsidize energy in the US or in the Middle East, right? Like there's this underlying belief that every household should have access to affordable energy.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, if we're going to subsidize it, which I'm a fan of, if we're going to subsidize it, then let's ask ourselves if the subsidies are creating a level playing field for all sources of energy, right? Like if you're just subsidizing fossils and not renewables, guess what?
Yeah. Exactly. So, um, it's fascinating. So, but again, like, I sort of said this at the top. A lot of people will hear some of Trump's statements and, think that that's reasonable, right? That we shouldn't be doing renewables and that actually we shouldn't be, doing some of these things. But again, trying to figure out where that middle ground is and how we meet the moment, is really important. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about, um, is you mentioned this at the top with like the broader piece of like Trump pulling us out of Paris, Biden putting us back in, Trump pulling us back out. But like, what would happen if the US left the UN, altogether? And like, in kind of this broader conversation about climate and energy policy and things like that, what do you think, or like, do you have any thoughts around like what happens with things like conversations at COP and conversations around other, these big issues that we've been talking about? Do you think Trump's comment is permission for countries to say, well, the US isn't gonna do
Mm,
it, we're not gonna do it either? Or does the rest of the world say, "Okay, well, US is out, and we're just gonna leave them out, and we'll keep going?" Like, because 'cause they're very different outcomes for where we go with some of this stuff. So I'm just kinda curious to your kind of like, and I don't know if you've had any thoughts around it, and I don't know what the
yeah,
right
like is
answer is.
this going to be an
Mhm.
excuse? Is this going to be an excuse for other countries to lower their
Yeah.
ambition, right?
Yep.
Um, I
I
mean,
don't
I
know.
don't know is the frank answer. I think the best case study we have to build on is like the first Trump administration when he did leave the Paris Agreement. And like for the most part, like even inside the US, there was the whole like we're still in movement, right? So like cities, companies, state governments all said we're still in and we're going to uphold our ambition and like meet our targets even if we're not federally mandated to. So that was uplifting to see from the outside. I'm not sure that we're still in that era, if I'm honest with you, right? Like what I'm
Mm.
seeing this time around is much more, Trump pretty much said it's okay to abandon DEI, or he's actually like mandated companies to and universities, like really any organization to abandon DEI. And like it feels like it's a different climate this time around, right? Like people are jumping on the opportunity to not engage anymore in like this whole like woke discourse. So yeah, I don't know. So like if they do lower their ambition, I mean like, like we did have climate day, climate summit at the UNGA this week. And what I saw was a whole bunch of countries getting up on stage and making climate commitments, right? Like getting up on stage and saying like we're still
That's good.
in, here's our renewed ambition, here's what we're going to do from now until 2030, 2040 and 2050. And I'm like I like I felt very uplifted reading that, right? So, like, China was on stage, right? Like, we saw some of the big emitters get up on stage and basically say, "We're still in." Um, so all I hope is that they that some of the large economies continue to see climate technologies as a competitiveness edge, right? Like we were just saying this, like China is now so
Yeah,
competitive on PV cells that it's actually an edge for them. So like I think that the thinking, well, I'm hoping that the thinking is shifting towards like, investing in climate is actually going to give us an edge in the future rather than thinking it's a cost on the economy.
I like that. Um, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I think, as this discord continues, and what that looks like. So